Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. Advanced Steel 2017 hit the streets about a week or so ago. I know some of you have already downloaded and installed it, so well done for that. And we're here today to find out what's new in this current version. So most of you already know me. My name is Alex Giles. I'm one of the technical support and consultants at Graitec Limited in the UK. So there are various help documents available telling you what's new in Advanced Steel. We've tried to pick out the salient points that we think are most relevant to our users. And we've split them into categories here. So under the modeling, the first thing that might please a lot of people is that you can now repeat commands if they've been taken from a palette. So something like rotate UCS about X or placing a joint, you can repeat. You can include concrete in base plates as well. On the general documentation, some of the fabrication data that was added in 2016 couldn't be used anywhere, but now that's been added in and all documentation can use that. And you can now control the approval statuses of items as well. On the drawing side, they've given you greater control of grid balloons around the letters and numbers at the ends of grids. The clipping line, when you crop a view and you chop parts off that go outside the view, can now be controlled. And manual dimensions have a big enhancement we'll talk about later. There's been quite a bit of work on bills of materials or lists. You can now include formulas. You can filter the field content list and find the token you're looking for more easily. There's improved sorting, and the drawing issue date on the lists now shows up. And interoperability, when it comes to BIM, you're going to be so far ahead of the curve. It's going to be brilliant. You've got much better viewing of native Advanced Steel files in other Autodesk products. IFC export has been enhanced. The Revit links have been greatly enhanced. So let's look in a bit more detail now. Starting off with the modeling side of the deal. So, as we say, you can now repeat commands if you've taken them from a palette. So that means any of the palettes. That's the Advanced Steel tool palette, the connection vault, the drawing processes, drawing styles, or BOM templates palettes. So as I say, something like rotate UCS about X. If you now just repeat that command instead of having to go back and click on the icon 2 or 3 times. In the connection vault, if you want to repeat the same joint you've just placed, you can repeat that command. To repeat a command, same as ordinary AutoCAD. So you can either just press return or enter on the keyboard and it will immediately repeat the last command. You can right click. If that doesn't come up with a menu, it's already repeated the last command, but it probably will come up with a menu and you want to select the top entry as shown in the image there from that menu. Or you can point at the recent input menu and look for any entry that ends in an underscore, such as Aster create connection by VB, and that will repeat that command. So in that particular command, that will repeat the last joint. So you don't have to go back to the connection vault, find the joint you placed and pick on it again. You just select that command and it will repeat that last joint type. Also, you can use the cursor up key on the keyboard and scroll through the last commands that have been used, find one that ends in the underscore and press return, and it will repeat that command. So it doesn't actually even have to be the last command, it could be last but one. They've changed the base plate joint in this version a little bit, and we wanted to tell you about that. It applies to various types of base plate. You've got the base plate, standard one that you use most, the base plate cut, corner base plate, and tube base plate. All 4 have been changed to work the same way. So they've now got a slightly different workflow to what they had in previous versions. When you click the button to start the joint, you'll get the prompt to select the column. You won't get the old select objects prompt. So you only get 1 click now to select that column. If you miss, you failed and you have to start the command again. But you get select column, and then you'll get a new question which will say, do you want to select an additional concrete object, yes or no? If you answer yes, you will then obviously be prompted to select a concrete object, and that is the normal select objects and accept. After you've selected the object, or if you said no, the base plate will then be created. The purpose of including concrete in the base plate is so that the material defined in that concrete can be used in the joint design calculation of that base plate. It'll take that strength into account. If you don't include it, you have to specify the material yourself within the joint. And obviously there's a potential that that material could be set to one thing when the actual concrete in the model is set to a different material. So this will link it up and make sure it remains accurate. One thing to be aware of is that if you have included concrete in a base plate connection, you will not be able to use the joint copy multiple or the create joint in a joint group multiple command with that joint. If you don't include concrete, you just place the base plate without the concrete, those two commands will work fine. You can duplicate that joint, no problem. The ordinary joint copy will still work fine. It'll prompt you for the concrete each time. Moving on then to general improvements in all the documentation. So in 2016, Autodesk added quite a few extra properties to all the parts, and they come under the heading of fabrication data. So you can see in the first image there were things like approval status, load number, carrier, fabrication station, heat number, and so on. And also on the material, once it's been numbered and got an assembly, you could set the more detailed properties for galvanizing. These properties could be set for the parts, but they couldn't be used anywhere until now. So now they've created new documents and new tokens so that you can show these properties in any type of document you wish. There's a whole raft of new tokens, as you can see in the list on the right, and you'll be able to use those tokens in drawing title blocks, in your bills of materials, in labels, or anywhere else that you can typically use tokens. And all of those properties are now available to you throughout the documentation. Approval status. Again, one of the changes they made in 2016 was to add approval status to many types of object. And now, instead of having a fixed list that comes out of the box with the install, you can control those different statuses. So to access it, you'd go to Management Tools, and then you'll go to the Object Property Editor. And you'll see there, as in the image on the right, you have a group there for approval status. And you can edit or add your own statuses to that list. Here I'm adding preliminary, and you can choose any colors you like for any of those statuses. So now, like I say, instead of having possibly rejected or revised and revised one or something strange, you can have any list of statuses you want for your purposes. And in case you didn't already notice, those statuses are available in a number of places. Every single object now in Advanced Steel, beams and plates and so on, all have an approval status on that fabrication data page. So you can call them up there. Every joint in the joint properties has an approval status at the bottom of the dialog box, so you can select them there. And the one that you're probably much more familiar with is a drawing in Document Manager. And if you use the match property commands in AutoCAD, so you can maybe match a beam size from another section, it will also take the approval status information with it. So be aware of that. If you might need to double check and say that beam was approved, but that doesn't necessarily mean this beam is approved. So just be aware and check that. Moving on then to the drawings. There's been a few changes here in the drawing side. First up, they've done some work with the grid lines. If you have several grids in your model, quite often the balloons clash or interfere with each other on the drawings, or even if they're just unusual layouts, they can be on top of each other. So now if you select the grid, you'll see you get a new grip point just below the balloon or just near the balloon. And if you select that grip point and move it, you can move the label and balloon for that grid. So you can see in the image on the right, I've moved the little a and little c to one side so that you can read them clearly. They also have a snap point at that point, so you could line up one grid with another using those snap points. Something else you might notice in that picture is that it's an elevation view, and I've got grid balloons at the top of the view. There's a new option been added into the system for that, and like all the options, it's under defaults in Management Tools. So if you find Drawing Presentation, General, and then balloons at top side of vertical grid lines, as shown in the bottom image there. If you tick that box, when you create an elevation GA and you get a grid line that is vertical, then instead of only having balloons at the bottom, it'll have balloons at the top and the bottom. And you will be able to select that grid, and like on a horizontal grid or a normal grid, you've got the tick box to control whether the labels are on or off at either end of that grid. So you can have finer control over those grid balloons. You can put them above or below, and you can move individual ones as you wish. So that should tidy up some GA drawings quite nicely. They've also changed the clipping line around views. If you do a close-up GA, you'll often have parts going off the view and they need to be cropped off. So apparently this was a frequent user request at Autodesk, and it will affect all the members that go outside your view. So you see in my image on the right there, it's a typical close-up detail, and the red lines around the edges are those clipping lines. Well, you can see now that you can change or control the type of line used. Until now, it's always been a zigzag line, and you're stuck with that. But now it uses the same type of clipping line that's used for clipping in the middle of an assembly drawing or a part drawing where it makes the beam shorter. And it even uses exactly the same default. So that's the drawing presentation. General specifies the default clipping type. And you have exactly the same choices for this as you have for the standard views. So you have no lines, which is probably what most of you have it set to. And that would mean that even in this 3D GA view, I would have the beams ending, but there would be no line across the end. It would just be fresh air. Or you can have the standard clipping, normal clipping, and you can choose any AutoCAD line type you wish. So typically that's a zigzag, but you could choose a dot dash or some other kind of line type that you prefer to mark those ends of the beams and the breaks in assembly drawings and assembly views. And the one that apparently was particularly of interest to people was the custom clipping line. And that's the one that's showing in the view there on the picture, where you have the one zigzag in the middle of the line. And it does look pretty good on that view, doesn't it? So that is the same default that controls your assembly drawings and part drawings for their views. So you can set that there, and you might want to change that from time to time depending on the type of drawing you're creating. Okay, the next point is probably the one that will make most people most happy. This is a big thing. So I'm going to try and say it slowly and clearly for you. You need to maybe make a note of this because it's not active by default. They have enhanced the way that manual dimensions will work when you select a non-standard point. So many people have talked to us about dimensions moving or disappearing on updating views. And we've always been telling you to use the preferred for manual dimensions snap point. Well, that all still applies. You should try and use that snap point whenever you possibly can. But occasionally you have to dimension something which isn't being offered by that snap point. So they've changed the way this is going to behave in future, which should make everyone happy. There used to be a default. It's all controlled by the defaults as always. And the default used to be called erase incorrect manual dimensions on update. Well, they've changed that now. It's now called manual dimension point behavior on update. Instead of just being a tick on or off, it's now got 3 values. So the first value is don't erase any manual dimension point. And this is equivalent to taking the tick out on the old option. Some people do that. It's a little bit risky because you could leave an incorrect dimension on the drawing, and you have to track that down and find it and move it. The default value out of the box is erase all invalid manual dimension points. And this is the same as having the old option ticked, which was the default then as well. And that's the behavior probably most of you are used to, where any of these points that weren't recognized and couldn't be tracked, the dimension vanished. Well, the third option is the new option, and you're probably going to want to find this and set this. So the default you're looking for, remember, is under Drawing Dimensioning, General, and then it's called Manual Dimension Point Behavior on Update. And the new value that you'll want to change to, I expect, is erase all invalid points no longer on object lines. And that will trigger the new behavior of the smart dimensions. So let's go to the next slide and explain that. So this new behavior, as I say, is only triggered when that setting is made. if you look at the image on the top there, it gives you an example. Your dimension chain must have at least one valid smart dimension point. So at least one point that the preferred for manual dimensions snap would give you. In this case, on that dimension, it's on the left-hand end of the beam where the RD symbol is pointing. So that's a valid point. You can track that one and move and follow that one around. The other points on that chain are not valid snap points for manual dimensions. You've got one in fresh air on the left, and you've got two going to the midpoint of the stiffeners, not the end points that we can track. So the midpoints you can't normally track. They've done an update on the drawing, and that gives you the bottom view. Now you can see here the dimension point that was in fresh air, yeah, that still disappears. That's no use to you. Doesn't really dimension anything useful. It was going to lose that. The stiffener on the right, that moved, that's changed. So again, it can't track the point, we knew that. So like before, that's still going to disappear. But probably on most of your drawings, 7 or 8 times out of 10, the points you're dimensioning aren't actually the points that are moving or changing. So if that happens, like the first stiffener on the left there, that stiffener didn't change and didn't move. So even though it's an invalid dimension point, the new behavior is that it's kept that point. The dimension to that point remains, it remains unharmed, untouched, and like I say, typically lots of your points will be unchanged. So most of your dimensions, manual dimensions, should survive the update, even if they're going through to non-standard points now. We would still recommend and encourage you to use the preferred for manual dimensions O-snap whenever possible, but if you have to choose another point, then you should get a lot less rework and a lot less editing of your drawings after that update. So I'm sure that will please everybody to know that their dimensions should be safer now. Moving on then to bills of materials. They've done a few bits of work here. It's all to do with external bills of materials, not the ones on drawings. We've been able to put formulas in the bill of material on a drawing for some time, but we couldn't put formulas in bills of material made with the external system. But now you can. So to do this, whenever you're editing the field content of a box, instead of choosing just an existing token, you can now choose a new token called formula. And once you do that, the little dialog box, the line at the top right of that content dialog box, has the arrow on the end, and you can use that to select any of the properties already showing on that list. And you can use any of the standard maths operators, plus, minus, divide, and times, along with brackets, to build up your formula. So a good example of how you might use this would possibly be on a bulk list. People have requested this in the past. Can we add a 5 or 10% to the quantity on a bulk list so we order some spares automatically? Well, now you can quite easily. The formula would simply be I quantity, which is the quantity token, times 1.05 or 1.1, and that will multiply the weight, the quantity, so you get the extra few bolts in your order for spares. So you can have as many formulas as you wish on one bill of materials, and you can use those and create them very easily now. So again, I think that will please a few people. We've had requests for that kind of thing in the past. If you do edit any bills of materials, you're probably already aware there's a lot of tokens that can be used when you go to that field content list, and quite a few have similar names as well, and it might be a bit confusing. So now if you look at the bottom left of that field content box, you've got a filter, and you can type a word in there and it will show you all the tokens that are relevant to that topic. So in that top picture there, I've put paint, and you can see there's 9 different tokens for different types of paint or different quantities of paint. So that isolates the ones you're looking for, and you can be easier to find the right one that you want. When you're sorting bills of materials, you used to be able to select to sort ascending or descending, but that applied to all the tokens you were sorting by. So if you're sorting by perhaps quantity and then length, they'd both be ascending rather than one up and one down. But now you can choose each property that you're sorting by and set each one to be sorted ascending or descending. And there's a new token which kind of links up with the previous one. A new token called isMainPartElement. As you're well aware, every assembly has a main part. So this one will identify if the part on the list is that main part, whether it's just an attached part. And that can be useful, especially in things like the UK assembly list, as you can see at the bottom right, where you have the assembly number and then it's listing the parts in that assembly. We've sorted there by the is main part element token, which I've included in the line as a hidden field, and I've sorted that descending. So that means that the main part always becomes the first part listed under each assembly. So rather than M coming after F alphabetically, now M, or with the main part, whichever one it is, it's always the first one listed under each assembly. So that can give you finer control and fine-tune your lists to give you neater and better output. One of the changes they made in 2016, as we've already alluded to, was the issue status of a drawing. Before 2016, in Document Manager, you just had a tick box in front of every drawing file name, and it was either on or off. But in 2016, it became linked up with the other approval statuses. So on the right-hand side of Document Manager there, you've got your list of different statuses you can assign to each drawing. That's nice, that's good, but unfortunately it meant that the issue date on the drawing lists didn't work anymore. Well, they've rectified that, and now if you set the status of the drawing to anything other than not set, then the issue date will be completed with the date that that property was last changed. So it doesn't matter whether if we say rejected or revised or preliminary, it will still complete an issue date for you. So now you can use that to get the better drawing lists of the issued drawings and so on. And couple that with the fact that you can have your customized statuses like preliminary, which isn't one in the box, and so on. You can step it through your manufacturing workflow. Maybe you've got for inquiry only or for construction and so on. They could all be added to that list as well. Now then, the really big subject for Autodesk and for the industry in general is interoperability. You've all heard of BIM. In the UK, we've got government's got a BIM standard, and whether it's affecting you yet or maybe in the future, it will come. BIM is all about exchanging and interoperability between software so that we can all share the information, and that's where Autodesk are putting a massive amount of effort, and we are so far ahead of the curve in what we can do. First up, in 2017, Advanced Steel, if you link that with the latest version of other products, they've improved the object enabler. So that means that AutoCAD 2017 or AutoCAD LT 2017, the proper desktop products, or the BIM 360 product, which is cloud-based document management, the A360 cloud-based storage and viewing, and AutoCAD 360, which is cloud-based AutoCAD. All of those Autodesk products can now view any native Advanced Steel file. You don't need to export it. You don't need to explode to ASYS. You don't need to explode the drawings. This is now enhanced. With AutoCAD, you could view the model, but now you can view the 2D drawings as well without any exploding or editing or exporting of any kind. You can see all of it. Every kind of Advanced Steel object will be visible in those other products. All the snap points will work on all those objects in all the products as appropriate. And the properties for all those objects are available. So that's all the Advanced Steel properties: the galvanizing state, the part number, the issue status, the heat number, the section size, whatever it is. All the Advanced Steel properties are available through any of those other products. You can select it, look at properties, and check things out. Don't forget that A360 has an app which works on smartphones and tablets as well. So you could be brilliant for site work or meetings with clients. You can show them the models and the work in progress. So that'll make it far easier to share the data with your work teams and partners, so everyone can see what's going on. So that's a really good enhancement. Then we've got further enhancements for other products. The UK BIM standard, and probably most other BIM standards, refer to the IFC file format, Industry Foundation Classes. The standard actually says use the best possible format available with the most intelligence, and we'll come on to that in the next slide perhaps. But they usually refer to the fact that if you can't find anything better, then at least give them an IFC to exchange data. It's sort of a lowest common denominator. But IFC has been enhanced by the body responsible for defining the format, and Autodesk are keeping up with the latest and best versions of that. So the file structure has apparently changed a little bit, and we can now include, when you export from Advanced Steel, it will include all the special parts. It will include any user sections you've defined, which is quite a thing. It's not just calling up a standard section. And it will include curved beams and polygon elements like polygon plates. So coupled with the enhancement from previously, where you can see in the image on the right, you've got two versions of IFC, IFC 2x3 and IFC MVD EM11. That second version is an enhanced version of the IFC format, especially for structural engineering. And we can include lots of the data. We can include probably more data than any other package. We can't guarantee what other packages can or can't include, and we can't guarantee whether they can import all this data or make a lot of sense of it, but it's all defined accurately according to the IFC standards. So you can be sure that we've got the best possible exports of your Advanced Steel data, and you are fully compliant with all BIM standards currently going. So that will be reassuring. And then we talk about Revit. Revit is to BIM what Hoover is to vacuum cleaner, really. A lot of people, if you say BIM, they think Revit. Autodesk have really done a really good job with Revit. It's very, very popular, very dominant in its marketplace. So if you're not already receiving and sending files to people with Revit, I'm sure it will come to you soon. And Advanced Steel, again, has the best possible exchange. Revit, or Autodesk, have written a special plugin to Revit called the Advanced Steel extension. You're probably already aware of that, and they've enhanced it each release. They're doing a lot of work to it to make sure that we can get the best possible exchange with Revit files, which is probably going to be the coordinating file for all the major projects in Britain soon. It's so popular. So with that kind of data, we can now synchronize and export grids. So the Advanced Steel grids link up with Revit grids, and in Revit the grids are critical and very important for creating views and so on. They're not just a cosmetic tool. We can now control what gets included in an export. If you hide an object in Advanced Steel, or if you hide the display of an object in Revit, you can now export based just on what's on display. So anything hidden wouldn't get exported. And that'll give you much finer control. Instead of exporting everything, regardless, only exports what you've wanted it to, should there be any reason to not give them the whole model. One of the big things with the SMLX format, which is talking about here with the extension, is that you can synchronize. So you don't have to start the model all over again every time something changes. And the synchronized dialog box has been enhanced in Revit, so it now uses the proper Revit project units. And when they select something that's changed, it will highlight the object in the model, so it's far easier for them to track what's going on and control things. And then probably the most impressive and most amount of work is the last one there. Steel connections can now synchronize, but we need to talk about that. So before I move on, the Revit extension is called the Advanced Steel 2017 extension, and they'll need Revit 2017 to get the most of that, or to use that and download it from free of charge from the Autodesk website. And there's a second extension for Revit 2017, again has to be 2017, which is called Autodesk Steel Connections for Revit. Now if you look closely at the dialogues on the right, that should look quite familiar to you, because what they've done, they've now added full Advanced Steel joints to Revit. 22 of our joints from Advanced Steel are now available in that extension in Revit, and I imagine more will likely come in future, don't know. These are currently the joints that have the joint design functionality available in them. So you can see in the right hand side there we have a haunch joint. Now it's very impressive because you can see there with the dialog box, it's exactly the same joint that you use in Advanced Steel. It's not a cut down version with limited options. It's got exactly the same options. It is exactly the same dialog box that you use in Advanced Steel to control that joint. So this allows them to do everything in Revit that they can do in Advanced Steel with those joints, including the joint design to AISC American or EC3 European codes. and that means they obviously put a lot more detail into their Revit models. But don't panic, it's not going to undermine your jobs. If you have a look at the model, the image at the top right there, all the parts in blue, the cap plate on the column, the stiffeners, the haunch piece, the plate and the bolts, those are all one single 3D solid. They're not individual parts. There is no practical way to get a detailed view of any of those parts. Because they're not individual parts, they can't be called up on any bill of materials or schedule or list at all. It's just one thing called a haunch joint. But what can happen, your engineers, if they're using Revit, or the architects, whoever's using Revit, can go to that level and they can look at that and they could play with a haunch joint, experiment with parameters and bolt spacings and so on, get it right, get it to pass EC3, and then send that model to you. They haven't got to give you scrappy drawings of each joint in each position. They can have the model which has the proper approved dimensions and joint on there. You import that model into Advance Steel and you will have a fully functioning, fully editable haunch joint or whatever other type of joint in Advance Steel. Now, they've already done the hard work, hopefully, and already worked out the parameters, so you don't have to edit it straight away. But you just have to hit the numbering and then hit the drawings, and you'll get proper detailed drawings for those parts. You'll get proper bills of materials and parts lists. And they will still need you to do that. There's nothing coming in that we know of that will undermine that. The detailing and the drawing is always going to be your job in Advance Steel. And this means that anybody, if you're partnering with a company that's using this functionality, and they want to share work with other companies that don't use Advance Steel, those other companies, they're going to have to start all over again with those joints. They might get the beams imported, but there's no way on earth they'll get any kind of joint import into their other software. So they're going to have to add that joint manually. They'll keep interrogating Revit if they can, if they have Revit, to find out the dimensions, and it will undermine and undo all that work. Whereas you say, yeah, I've got Advance Steel, I can import it perfectly. So you're better off coming to me as your partner, and we can work together much more closely. So that's a really big addition, and you can see how Advance Steel really is kind of leading the way on this, because they've had to do a lot of work in Revit to help Revit communicate better with Advance Steel. So that if your project team all on Autodesk software, you're going to have the best bee's knees import export of anyone and the smoothest workflows. So that's a big addition and a nice headline grabber. So that basically concludes the list of what we think are the salient points, the most important topics for the What's New in 2017. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you very much. I hope you found it interesting.